Hello, I'm Alex McLaren. I'm an actor and I've worked as a communications coach since 2002. Now so much business is being conducted remotely, the ways in which we talk, present, build relationships and connect is changing. In this podcast, I want to explore all those issues and prove to you that no matter who you are, you can talk to anyone. Hello and welcome to You Can Talk to Anyone, the podcast in which we open the bonnet on our communications engine. I'm Alex.
And I'm Tom.
And this week we're going to talk about the business of tough customers, conversations when you are buying things. I'm just aware, Tom, that when I am shopping, a slightly different version of me comes out, and it varies what I'm buying and maybe what I'm spending. But I'm also very aware that I can't generalize from my own experience of what it's like to buy things and assume that everybody else is the same. So what kind of shopper are you, Tom?
Well, this is one of those areas in which you're absolutely right. Everybody has their own likes and dislikes, their own foibles. I am not a natural haggler.
Okay.
I dislike it. My partner, Deborah, who long-term listeners of this podcast will know well, very much enjoys getting a deal.
Right.
And will play one party off another if she's spending a lot of money in one go in order to get the best possible deal she can. And the whole process makes me profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'm very conscious of the price of things, maybe. I was genuinely wondering as I thought about this, Tom, am I mean? I don't know. I don't think that I am. I'm just very aware that if I feel comfortable if I see a number, I know what it is and I know it's not going to move. And I know that also if I was to look at comparable products, that it's going to be roughly in that ballpark. I don't like the fact that in the world of the internet, so buying an aeroplane flight, I mean, like it, literally from minute to minute, the price goes zooming all over the place.
Yes.
And I partly suspect that somebody's reading what I'm putting into my computer and changing it. And
there is a suspicion of that. And it is definitely something which it can be done. I don't think it happens quite as much as people sometimes suspect it does.
Yeah, but my suspicion is that it's a bit of an urban myth. But it definitely does move, and maybe it's just to do with the coincidence of when I'm doing my browsing and other people are doing theirs that the demand seems to be changing at the other end. But I suppose the reason I raise it is that maybe people are getting a different, more neurotic version of me in conversation when I'm about to commit to spending some money. And I was wondering sort of what the origins of it all are.
Well, it also makes a difference, doesn't it, if this is an ongoing relationship. If you're going to see this person again, if this is a regular purchase, or if you're walking into a shop or some other place of business, you're going to conclude this transaction, walk out, and never see the other person ever again.
Yeah, I think the first shops I went into when I was a kid, so at the end of my road on Wellington Road, there was a newsagent called Riders, and that was a shop I would actually go into myself and buy sweets. I think it may have been the shop I tentatively shoplifted sweets from before I was busted for it. And I understand that this is a pretty standard procedure small boys go through. I don't know about small girls, my brothers and I. And of course, you know, we carried on buying our Beanos there every week. And then when I was a teenager, I would go into, there were kind of shops I'd regularly visit in town. I go to the Games Workshop, you know, where the sort of White Dwarf magazine and little lead miniatures and Warhammer. And in fact, they very definitely set up those shops as a community for people to hang and talk and not spend money. And so maybe I was very aware that that commercial dimension is not just a transaction, it's a long-term relationship. And so it makes sense as a shopkeeper to have people in your shop, even if they're not spending money there, because they will come back and they might. And then I used to always go to Waterstones. Our bookshop in town was Sweetens. And then a Waterstones opened. A Waterstones had a very clear policy that people were allowed to just hang around reading books and browsing. It was they weren't going to chuck people out for basically road testing the material. And as a teenager, that meant you could work your way through a whole graphic novels collection. So I suppose there's always
Work your way through Mouse if you weren't able to get it from your school library, for example.
Yes, exactly. And you can buy. In fact, I must order a copy of that for
It's tremendously
my son immediately. Yeah. So I just felt kind of that sense that I'm in somebody else's territory, I suppose, has always been relevant when I'm a customer. And I suppose it goes back to something we were talking about on an earlier episode about, are you a guest or are you a host? But it's complex when you're a customer, because there's also this idea that the customer is always right. So you have a certain, you're in somebody else's space, with the, potentially spending money there, but at the same time you also have this sense that that I have a right to explore everything before I then finally hand over the cash and take it out of the shop. So there's that sort of strange power dynamic there, which is kind of slightly tricky.
Yeah, and we've worked with people in sales of various kinds. But one thing I do like to emphasize is that when a negotiation is taking place, it is a negotiation that's happening on both sides. I don't believe it's the job of the salesperson to outwit the person buying in order to get the best possible deal. I'm interested in helping both parties build a strong relationship. So, for example, letting people into your shop to browse and look at the figures makes sense because it builds up a loyal customer base. And they may choose to buy things from you, even if they can get a slightly better price elsewhere at some other cost. Maybe if it's via mail order, they'll get a lower price, but they'll have to wait 3 days for it to be delivered.
Yes, and in the case of Games Workshop specifically, that strategy has worked out phenomenally well. I don't know if you know, but they had the most astonishing lockdown because people were stuck at home, bored out of their minds, and they wanted to revive hobbies that they hadn't had time for and had been dead for 20 years. And so they absolutely exploded through the COVID era. So it's just that's partly the kind of the very long game they were playing worked out very well for them. Here's a question. Have you ever, I was thinking about when I've been a successful customer, when I feel like I've made an effective purchase, but I was also thinking of when I've made a bad purchase and I feel that it's not quite worked out.
It's always a queasy feeling, isn't it? If, as the purchaser, you make an offer and it's accepted immediately.
Yes.
I mean, I'm talking about spending a lot of money in one go. But if you say, well, I'll give you X for it, and the other person says done, starts shaking your hand straight away, it's never a happy sign.
Yes, and there's maybe there's kind of a snob thing. I don't care to bargain, all I want to do is just buy this and walk away. And maybe you end up paying in order to opt out of a process that if you didn't have the readies that you might feel it was probably worth going through. I've recently. I'm sitting at the top of my house in Folkestone and I'm looking across the valley to the Bale, and I nearly bought a house there. I don't know if you know. Did I remember? I'm sure I told you about it.
Yeah, I remember. There was a house you had your heart set on.
We had Zoe and I had our heart set on this house. Now, a house buying is a particular kind of purchase, and I obviously wanted to feel confident that I was making the right choice. And one of the problems with this particular house was that I wasn't able to have a conversation with the owner. And I was telling myself at the time that maybe that doesn't matter so much because I'm not going to be having an ongoing relationship with this individual after the purchase is over. So I would talk to the estate agent, and the estate agent would then say, oh, we'll talk to the vendor. And then they would get back to me. But it became increasingly difficult to communicate with them. And then I tried to figure out who they were and where they were. I was told that they were living in Southend. No, forgive me. They weren't living in Southend. They were living in China. They were the owners, and therefore I remember sort of putting together an appeal to lower their price and having it translated by the Chinese wife of a friend of mine, and so asking it to be relayed to them, and then later discovering that they weren't living in China at all; they were living in Southend, and then Zoe, my partner, bumped into them outside the house because they'd actually come to Folkestone to look at it. And they offered to drop the price by, I think, a substantial lump, but nowhere near to what we could afford. So it was right at the edge of what we could afford. And so we ended up stepping away from the purchase. And I think if we'd been able to speak to them in person earlier in the process, potentially we may have ended up buying the house. But I know it would have been a disaster because it turned out to have all sorts of problems with it, which only emerged when it was later purchased by somebody else. So it's a real salutary tale in my buying and communicating history that it's a really lucky thing that I didn't get what I wanted in terms of the way we were doing it. You ever had any particularly kind of painful purchase experience when you felt like, oh, damn it, I was sold a pup, or I trusted somebody that I really shouldn't have done, and maybe there would have been a different way of doing it that would have been better?
Helpfully for this podcast, I don't think I do, which is just luck more than anything else, I suppose.
Well, maybe it's not, because I was just wondering, I think that you're somebody who's quite good at letting go of sunk costs. That was a disaster. Now let's just move on to the next thing.
It's true. Maybe for people who don't know, it's worth just running through the sunk cost fallacy. The easiest example I know is you bought tickets to a concert, and now on the day of the concert, you don't feel well, and you no longer feel like going. And especially if these were expensive tickets, then the psychological urge is, well, I've paid for these tickets. I should use them, even if actually going to the concert is going to be a miserable experience. And you are allowing a sunk cost, funds that you've expended which you can no longer get back, to influence your decision about what you do next. The question should be, will I enjoy going to the concert or not? Because the money that's already been spent is at this stage irrelevant.
I think something I've got better at over the years, but certainly I can let purchases I've made or expenditures that I've incurred just gnaw at me, even though there's absolutely nothing I can do about it thereafter.
What's the other than your house? What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought?
That's a good question.
Houses don't count because banks give you the money.
Well, actually, I mean, I'm thinking of a recent, sort of quite successful purchase, which was my car.
Yes.
And so, and now this is interesting because, substantial purchase here, and also it was as a customer. It wasn't ideal circumstances. So this was at the beginning of December, and I'd been sick, and so I was away in hospital.
There's something going around.
Yeah. But also Zoe's mother was sick. So basically she was caught between a parent who needed her in Sussex and me who wasn't around, and trying to get Frank to school in the morning. So it was a very, very stressful set of circumstances. And so this is an issue. We were in a hurry. And it's not a good idea to be making important high-value purchases when you're in a rush.
No.
But in some ways it did simplify some things. So first of all, I'd never bought a second-hand car before, all right? And I did have a car, but it had been a gift. And so we had to find some way of actually test driving cars just to get familiar, just to be a little confident that we were about what we were doing, and meeting some dealers as well. So we went through quite a complex process of renting cars, driving to dealerships, sort of asking to drive around cars that we reckon might have been within our budget, and then coming back and thinking about it. We did this a couple of times. So there was this human element of meeting dealers and also talking to them on the phone, because I'd been given advice not to buy a car unless I could have my mechanic look at it. And I really do trust my mechanic. So I've got this ongoing relationship with the brilliant guys at Zanchis around the corner from me. So the dealers that were very happy and relaxed about that, that felt sort of quite like a good place to start. Don't worry, our vehicle will pass expert tests by other people rather than just suckers like you.
But the people who act like they've got something to hide probably have.
Well, that was the thing. Well, why are you being so tricky about this? Particularly as by the time I've could have taken my car to my mechanic, I'll have handed over a lot of money and I'll be 100 miles away potentially in Kent. So, you might as well go for it. And then we kind of stepped back from it and we decided, and this is partly a function of the internet, and maybe buying things is different in the era of the internet. We decided that we couldn't cope with anything more complex than replacing the car we had with the exact same car. So then we simply started looking for that car wherever it was. And we also learned that our statutory rights in an internet sale were actually quite strong. So we could simply send it back if we could find a way of getting it there, wherever it came from, if we changed our mind. And that worked. But then actually it didn't matter to have the conversation. So I rang these guys in Portsmouth where we'd found the car and spoke to Jack. And in fact, I will give a shout out on this podcast. It's at Gravel Hill Car Sales in Portsmouth. And first of all, Jack was completely relaxed when I told him what my buying process was going to be. I was simply going to get this car, drive it around, take it to my mechanic, and if he liked it, then I would not return it. And he seemed perfectly happy about that. But then he called me on the day it was due to be delivered. This was just before Christmas, and said he had a problem. And at that point, I thought, have I kind of got stuck now in the long grass of used car sales? And he said that the person who was meant to drive it over from Portsmouth to Kent, where I lived, had let him down. And so he wasn't going to be able to get it to me that day. Now, that was a problem for me because my mechanic was closing a couple of days later, and if I was expecting to have it today, take it to the mechanic tomorrow morning, and then also actually go and visit my sick mother-in-law the day after that. And so I had to say to Jack, I'm afraid that's a bit of a problem because of my schedule. So I talked him through it, and then and he said, well, there's nothing I could do, said Jack. I said, well, I bet there is, so go away and think about it. And Jack went away. And I then sent him cheerful, pleasant text messages through the rest of the day, not hearing from him until eventually at 5:30 he rang me and he said, I've solved the problem. And I said, that's good news, Jack. What's going to happen? He said, I'm about to get in it and drive it from Portsmouth to Kent myself, which was absolutely heroic. And he showed up with this marvellous car that Zoe and I are very, very pleased with. And it's but it wasn't totally straightforward, but it worked out because he was fair.
Yeah.
And even though I was stressed, this was the thing. I think the stress of high value purchases can make people less nice than they really ought to be. I managed to stay nice throughout.
So I remember when we started doing our work on negotiations, one of the things that dawned on me, which is one of those things that sort of sounds trivial, but it's easily overlooked, and I think therefore worth pointing out, that is in a negotiation, it's very rare to get something for nothing. If you're the purchaser, and you say, well, can I have it for 20% off? The answer probably will be no, unless the seller has begun at a very inflated price and knew that that was unrealistic and that was always going to come down, which does sometimes happen.
Yeah.
But one of the things as the purchaser you can offer is speed. You can say, I will give you 20% less than you're asking for, but I will give that to you in cash today, right now. And a bird in the hand, etc. So some people will go for that. The flip side of that, the darker kind of flip side of that, is it's an old sales trick to vary the deal at the last possible moment. So when the purchaser feels as if the deal is done, they've started to relax, they've started making plans, as you had suddenly to say, actually, it's going to be 10% more. And I recommend that you stand your ground. This happened to us, actually, when we bought our flat at the last minute. We said we wanted to exchange after Christmas because we weren't going to be ready to move out before then. And the letting agent said, well, we have another buyer who's willing to pay 10% more than you, who will exchange tomorrow. And we smelled a rat.
Yeah.
And we said, well, you should probably take that in that case, because 10% more sounds like a fantastic deal. That deal whether it existed or not, did not in fact go through, and we were able to exchange after Christmas as we wanted.
No, that's good. I mean, being tough in those circumstances is important. I just meant, I should really make clear, I have no reason to doubt that Jack actually did have a delivery problem and he wasn't simply trying to kind of have an easy day.
It sounds like it. Whereas I have very few doubts that the buyer who was going to pay 10% more for our flat was entirely a figment of that letting agent's imagination. No doubt what she actually wanted was to have this sale on the books at the end of that calendar year because it was going to affect her end-of-year bonus.
Yes, no doubt. I mean, if you do run the risk of freaking somebody out when they're already in quite a stressed state. One of the dealers we visited, there was this yard basically behind, just off a main road, and a hut, and out came this bloke, and it was very much like a kind of a comedy sketch cliche of a car dealership, and a comedy sketch cliche of a car dealer who, when he was kind of probing us for what we were looking for, at one point he simply said to us, "No. The problem is you're simply trying to look at too many cars. You want to buy a car," and at that point I was thinking, I just could feel the hair standing up all over my body. And I had to say to Zoe, "This is making me feel very uncomfortable. Let's leave." And it's, despite the fact we were surrounded by cars, many of which were sort of, I'm sure, were more or less what we were looking for. But it was just there was no way I could feel confident in the vehicle I was getting from this bloke and my statutory rights thereafter. One thing which I've come across in my work is that if you're a professional buyer, if you're somebody who is effectively buying things on behalf of your organisation, that can do strange things to your communication style. Have you ever come across this, Tom? And if you are a procurement person out there, please do get in touch with your perspective on this, especially, incidentally, if you've got contradictions. But I remember once working with a team in which they were all incredibly tough, low reactors. It might have been the business they were part of. They were in the rag trade, clothes business, basically, and I know that the margins are very, very tight there, and so the when you're negotiating it over price, then it's a standard to be very, very tough about that. But what it meant was, I remember particularly for one particular person, was that he found it quite difficult to negotiate with people within his organisation in order to delegate work and so on. That he was constantly wearing the kind of the armor of, I am not going to be sold to, I am going to be doing the buying.
Yes.
And so that kind of affected the way that they were engaging with everybody, because a successful strategy in one key part of their professional life had started to seep into other areas of their lives as well.
Yes, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes.
It's very easy to apply the same technique in many different similar circumstances, when actually a technique that serves you very well over here may be useless or counterproductive over there.
Yes, and also I guess there's maybe the flip side to it as well, in that that element can affect your engagement with people when you're thinking about mates rates. So, I mean, the town I live in is full of entrepreneurial people, some of whom are opening shops, so your friend is then suddenly somebody who is selling things, and you feel almost a sense of, oh right, well I should definitely buy that sort of
support this
from. Yeah, exactly. You want to back them, but there's a second strand to the way you're engaging with each other, which can affect the way you talk to each other. Actually, when I think about it, I think mainly there's just a risk to them of me wasting their time as I stand inside their shop gossiping and talking rather than not buying their things from them.
But it comes back to something we've talked about in this podcast before, and that is, first of all, the importance of building relationships, but also the relative importance of building relationships. Right now, is it more important for me to get the best possible deal I can buying this material, for example, if I'm in the rag trade, because the margins are tight and I have customers on the other end who are waiting for clothes, and I've just got to get the best possible deal I can, and I don't know if I'm going to deal with you again. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. So I can afford to play hardball, as opposed to when I'm trying to run my team and delegate work to them where I absolutely know I'm going to be seeing them again tomorrow. And my relationship with them is of paramount importance. And so it might very well do better for me to do them a favor today and let them go home early or do whatever it is they want to do, because they will then see me as a fair boss and someone to whom they owe a favor in future.
Yes, and I think sort of distinguishing between different ways of doing things is maybe the way out of feeling you're stuck with a particular pattern. I know that occasionally I have noticed that I make particular kinds of purchase in a better way when I'm doing it without that human conversational dimension. So I've become quite good at eBay. And I'm trying, and I know exactly what it is that I want to buy because I can see it. Then it's a simple matter of trying to make sure I get a price which suits me, and I'm quite good at letting go. Incidentally, when I don't win auctions,
eBay does a lot of that negotiating for you. It allows you to put in a price that's the maximum you're willing to spend. And the absolute trick with eBay, as you say, is decide what that maximum price is, put it in, and never change it. Maybe you will win and maybe you won't, but if that was your maximum, then going over it is a foolish decision. And if it wasn't your maximum, then you did the first bit wrong.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it shouldn't change over time. You should decide, now this is as much as I'm willing to spend, and then eBay will increase your bid up to that maximum if there is competition. You don't have to lift a finger after then.
Okay. Well, actually, tell me whether you think this is... Because what I do is I do make that decision about how much this is going to be worth to me. But what I do is I snipe at the last minute because I quite like the excitement of feeling that I've dropped a deer at a long distance with my long range rifle. So I do like the buzz of it finishing.
That is the other tactic. And indeed, there are tools you can get which will snipe at the last minute for you. Typically, they'll snipe with 10 seconds to go for free, and they'll snipe with 1 second to go if you pay a fee. But of course, there may be multiple of these bots all trying to out-snipe each other.
Yes,
so
you
very
can't
often,
always win.
You can't always win, and very often you'll see this sort of flurry of last-minute bids, which is, it's all part of the fun. Because I don't like negotiating, even that, I don't like the tension of that. When I buy things on eBay, 90% of the time, it's a buy it now price.
It's a buy it now. How interesting.
I don't do the auctions. I don't like the stress.
All of my eBay searches are auction only, Tom. I don't go anywhere near the buy it now stuff. Thank you so much for joining in, those of you who've been listening. And your homework this week is to go and try out an alternative buyer conversation in a low-stakes situation and see what kind of experience you come up with. So if you're somebody who tries to avoid the chat with the sales associate or the shop assistant, then go in and with a little bit more time and spend a lot of time building a relationship and see if you end up coming out with more positive experiences. And likewise, if you are somebody who just likes to waste shopkeepers' times like me, see if you can do all of your research before you ever go anywhere near a sales situation and make a clean kill. And let us know how it goes for you.
Yes, please. Alex and I deliver training days to people in business in person or via Zoom on all of these topics. We talk to them about client meetings, better negotiations, presenting with confidence, storytelling, networking, and much else besides. If you'd like to get in touch with us to discuss what you do and how we might be able to help you, then you can send an email to info@the-spontaneity-shop.com, or you can give the Spontaneity Shop a call on 020 7788 4080.
And we'd love to hear from you. If you've got experiences you want to share with us or topics you'd like to cover as part of the show, drop us an email or record your thoughts in a voice memo. We might even play it on a future show. Until next time, I'm Alex.
And I'm Tom.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye. You have been listening to You Can Talk to Anyone with me, Alex McLaren, and my guests Susan Harrison and Lucy Trott. The producer for The Spontaneity Shop was Tom Selinsky. You Can Talk to Anyone is brought to you by the House of the Guilty Feminist and is distributed exclusively by Acast.